Our Share the Plate recipient this month is the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee, specifically their fund to provide emergency relief to people and partner organizations in Haiti. And this morning, I want to tell you a story about the beginnings of the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. In 1939, a Unitarian minister named Waite Still Sharp was contacted by leaders of the American Unitarian Association. And he was asked if he would undertake secret missions in Europe to help get Jewish, Unitarian, and other marginalized refugees out of what was becoming an increasingly dangerous situation with Nazi power growing in Europe. And he said yes, as long as his wife, Martha, a social worker, could join him as a partner in that work. And that began several years of the two of them working together, undertaking incredibly dangerous work. And that work was the beginning of what is now known as the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. The flaming chalice, that symbol that we ritualize every Sunday as we light the chalice flame, became a symbol of our faith movement during that time period, as well as that flaming chalice image was created specifically for the service committee to mark their correspondence. In the end, both Martha and Waite Still survived the war, and they helped bring many, many people to safety, including hundreds of children. Now, they were acting as individual citizens, but connected to a whole network of faith organizations. And it was during a time in 1939 when they first started, when the US government was not acting and was not even giving many visas to those who were fleeing Nazi occupation. So Waite Still and Martha and many others, they were embracing this radical possibility that they, as ordinary citizens, might make an extraordinary difference. Now, most of us don't receive the kind of direct call that the Sharps did. No one is calling me up and asking me to leave my children behind to go on secret missions. But I think it's interesting what the grandson of the Sharps said in an interview after he had made a film about them. And some of you have seen this film. It's called Defying the Nazis. Their grandson said this: if we have a personal objective for the film, it would be that it would inspire people to be kinder to each other. Now, these are dramatic moments to leave your family, go to Europe, but the story of the film is really about our communities, our schools, our churches, and how we can be civil and help each other in that sense of selflessness, end quote. So I tell you the story of the Sharps this morning, not to lift up some unreachable example of moral perfection. I mean, they were human beings after all. Their marriage didn't last. Their relationship with their children was very complicated. I lift up this story to remind us that every day, in small and sometimes big ways, we are called over and over again to embrace the possibility that we might make an extraordinary difference when we act with love. And I also lifted up this morning to remind us that though we often lift up these individual examples of moral courage, the Sharps were not acting alone. First of all, they engaged in this work together, the two of them, and they were also part of a much broader collective of people that were acting together, a whole network of people. And finally, they were part of creating an organization which endures to this day, the Unitarian Universalist Service Committee. So what might this story tell us about the situations we find ourselves in today? Author and activist Adrienne Marie Brown wrote last month that, quote, "Since the beginning, COVID has asked one thing of us, to act collectively. And yet," she says, "the divisions between us are dangerous and near total." So how do we act with moral courage today, embracing the possibility for making a difference in this context where the divisions are dangerous and near total? Sociologist Tressie McMillan Cottom wrote in the New York Times this week about the limits of her empathy. And she said this: "I still do not understand how we can be in community with people who, by withdrawing from their social responsibility, are actively harming others. But I do not think I have to understand it," she says. "I don't think that I even have to be in community with COVID deniers. I have to somehow be in community with the people who are behaving in socially responsible ways without demonizing those who are not. Demonizing them," she says, "turns my community into a reactionary force, which is precisely how the vaccines and masks became weaponized to begin with. It is a classic case of not becoming what you despise by losing focus on what you value." End quote. Many of us are grappling with McMillan Cottom's question: how to be in community with people who have withdrawn from their social responsibility. We Unitarian Universalists affirm the interdependence of all existence. It is one of our 7 commonly held principles. But it is really, really hard to live as if that is true in the day-to-day of life under our current dominant culture. This dominant culture I would describe as late-stage capitalism, individualism run amok, that equates individual rights with freedom, and it equates profit and productivity with moral right. It is this dominant culture and economic system that is actually starting to disintegrate. And I think the polarization of our current political and cultural context in the United States is a symptom of that disintegration as we face climate catastrophes, widespread refugee crises, a global pandemic, and deepening inequality. Holocaust survivor Viktor Frankl wrote, "Life always offers us a possibility for the fulfillment of meaning." So I don't want us to give up on seeking the possibilities, even now, for the fulfillment of meaning. Even in the face of disintegration, there is great possibility for new life, great possibility for love if we listen for its call. So I want us to consider that the main thing we are all of us, I don't mean just us, our small community, the main thing that we are all experiencing right now is grief. It's just that we may be in different stages. Denial is the first stage of grief, according to Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, and we live in a society deeply resistant to admitting vulnerability, deeply resistant to admitting that we might have done some things wrong, deeply resistant to even talking about death. Our society is built on denying death as much as possible. And so some of us may never move out of that stage of grief that's called denial. We deny that the climate is changing. We deny that racism exists. We deny that COVID is dangerous and that vaccines actually help save lives. Now, some of us are moving between the other levels of the grief cycle: anger, bargaining, and maybe some glimmers of acceptance. It helps me to have compassion for others when I consider that we are in collective deep grief. Much of the time, I can get so wrapped up in what other people are doing or saying, or not doing or not saying, that it pulls me far away from the center that I want to stay on, a center of love and compassion. I miss the mark of the compassion that I aim for. I begin to be defined by who or what I'm against rather than who or what I am for. I forget that I am part of the great interdependent web of all existence that includes everybody, the whole world, including the scientists working so hard on the COVID vaccines, the nurses at Blount Memorial Hospital taking care of 22 people in the intensive care unit on Friday. It includes the people who are already getting booster shots, the people around the world who haven't even had access to one shot yet, even if they wanted it. And it includes the people actively refusing to be vaccinated, even though they have access. That, my friends, is why I need a community of faith and practice that calls me back to big love, love that is bigger than me, over and over again. I'm not talking about cozy and close love, like friendship love. I'm talking about connecting with that big love that holds us all. Religious community exists to call us back to that love and that compassion. Adrienne Marie Brown describes it something like this. She says, "I now live by these words from my friend Prentice Hemphill. Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. Love, not tolerate or survive, but love. When I speak these words as reminder, as mantra, they give me hope that no one has to be disposable, cut off from the vast connectivity of love. It's just a matter of distance." I'm going to share that phrase with you again. Boundaries are the distance at which I can love you and me simultaneously. Our faith, the practice of our Unitarian Universalist faith, the building of our community, is not for the good, easy, and happy times. We are here for times just such as this, times when we are reminded every day of the high stakes in this life, times when we are clearly being called to act with courage and compassion. And it's really hard to figure out how to do that. We don't have to wait until the UUA calls us up for some secret mission, like they called on the Sharps. We listen for the call of love together, and we call on each other. It is written right in our congregational mission, actually, that we will challenge one another to live lives of service, to show up with love. And when we fail to do that, when we are pulled off of our center, we can always start again. The Jewish word that is usually translated as repentance is teshuvah, which literally means to turn or return. It's a Hebrew word, teshuvah. And Rosh Hashanah, the new year, opens into the days of awe, 9 days of reflection until Yom Kippur. It's a time to take account, to think about where we have hurt or wronged others or ourselves, and to ask for forgiveness of those sins. And here I want you to consider the word sin not as something fundamental to who you are, not a state of being, but think of it as a state of doing, as something connected to our choices, connected to our actions, connected, in fact, to our collective action, just our individual actions. Sin can be understood as missing the mark. We aim to be this kind of person or this kind of community, and yet we rarely hit the bullseye of what we say we're about. During the days of awe, there is an encouragement to actually go ask for forgiveness from those you have individually wronged, to consider making amends and saying that hardest word, sorry. In this time of change from one season to another, I invite you, us too, to consider which of our personal relationships we might need to tend to, who you might need to say, I'm sorry to. And I invite you, as you think about that, to think about that phrase, that boundaries are the space that allows me to love myself and you at the same time. In the end, though, this is what I love about the Jewish cycle of the new year. In the end, the High Holy Day service of Yom Kippur is about collective confession and asking for forgiveness, not just an individual project. So we ask together for the strength to change, to turn towards health and peace. We ask together for the wisdom to return to that boundary where we can love ourselves and we can love those who wish us harm. We remember that we can only control our own actions and reactions, and we ask for help staying true to our values, even as we recognize our complicity in systems that we would not choose. I think about the fact that so much of the vaccine resistance and the COVID denial is fueled by misinformation on social media, for instance. Now, I have never posted anything directly, to my knowledge, that spreads false information about COVID, and yet I do use Facebook. And so in some ways, I am complicit in that system that is contributing to this division in our society right now. So we need times when we recognize that in ourselves, when we just take a moment, several days even, to ask for the help to return to who we want to be in this world and to discern how we in our own lives can do that. Confessing and asking for forgiveness collectively reminds us that none of us reaches wholeness and reconciliation alone. We will all only be saved together if we take our interdependence seriously. And so today I invite us into our own annual ritual to begin again in love. We'll participate together in this litany that was written by the Reverend Rob Eller Isaacs. And there is a sung response. Hannah just put the words up on the screen. We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. So I will read a line and we'll pause for a moment, just a moment of your own reflection. And then Hannah will lead us in singing, we forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love. For remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that we have struck out in anger without just cause.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
The selfishness which sets us apart and alone.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in
love. For falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For losing sight of our unity.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For those and for so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again.
May it be so. Amen.